I love Malcolm X. I loved his fighting back. And putting it in words that everybody could understand. I taught a course once on teaching white teachers how to teach black literature. There were nuns. These nuns, as a group, loved Malcolm X. Isn't that strange?
Yes.
One thing they loved about him was his love for the dictionary. They liked that. Yeah, Malcolm X had heart and mind. He had it. He had it too much, of course. And when he wanted to spread the results of his heart and mind to other countries, then they had to get rid of him. Yeah, he was too much of a magnet to other people outside the United States. See, when black people began to connect themselves with things outside the United States, then they're on a heavenly track. Oh, yes.
Limbo begins with questions about whether I want to be in the United States or not. I was feeling completely un-American. I wanted to be free. The one thing this culture doesn't want you to do is feel. And personally, I felt repressed. The aftermath of 9/11 happened, and freedom was what I felt was lacking in the United States at the time. As the Patriot Act happened, after the racial profiling, as people were being corralled, I didn't want to be here. So I needed to go somewhere else to see if it was me or if it was the environment that I was living in. And what better place to go to than the place that called Baldwin, Miles Davis, Richard Wright did it, Josephine Baker did it, Josephine Baker. So I went to Paris in a state of limbo.
Yes, Paris is my home. It doesn't mean I don't have other homes. It doesn't mean that Brooklyn isn't my home or New York isn't my home. But Paris is definitely a home for part of me. I sort of call Paris my heart's home, my psyche's home. Because I have to say that coming here is really what kind of helped me to develop or bloom into the person I am now. And I sort of came here a little bit in tatters. And so Paris really had a very home-like feeling.
I had come to Paris when I was a young woman, and I remember my first trip here. I fell madly, madly in love with the city. I had a passion. I don't think I've ever had a passion for another city like this one. It was immediate. It was an immediate physical, visual experience.
I first got the idea when I was 12 years old, and I read Go Tell It on the Mountain, James Baldwin's first novel.
Wow.
And that novel is set mostly in Harlem and in the South. But it's one of those books that just really just shook me up, changed my consciousness, and here was this story of black people in Harlem, and it was just, a lot of stuff I could relate to. And I asked my teacher, who is James Baldwin? And he said, he lives in Paris. And I just thought that was the wildest idea. That, wow, here's this black guy from Harlem, and he writes this great book, and he lives in Paris. Paris seems so far away and exotic to me.
There were all kinds of incredible activities that go on in the streets. But it was always like that. If you read the history of France, street activity was always fervent everywhere. And I love that. I love that part of it. And of course, you had all of the outdoor cafe life. So walking along the street, someone that you happen to be looking for on the telephone, because the telephone service was very bad, you would find suddenly there on the street, sitting in a cafe.
Now, I came over the first time with my family, wife and child. And I didn't speak much French, even don't speak much now. But as a child, I'd spent all these years, night after night, if possible, in the library. I had read about everything in that library in terms of fiction, except books that were meant for girls. I wouldn't touch a book that was meant for girls, but I read everything else. And so I had read stories about France by Edgar Allan Poe, Hercule Poirot. I had all of these ideas, and I had read Count de Cullen's sonnet for France. And this struck me, what he said in the sonnet. I said, that's... Now, I'd read about Richard Wright and other people who had come here. And, frankly, and this isn't a good thing to say about myself, I thought the French ladies would be very nice. I had the idea of a French woman. I wanted to know one.
Yes. What's wrong with that?
Well, I guess nothing's wrong in my opinion. But it did influence me a little bit. I had this idea of the lovely French ladies. Yeah.
I had this idea for 20 years of going to Paris someday, and I couldn't afford it when I was younger. And then when I was in my 20s and working at Time magazine and could have afforded a holiday in Paris, I never wanted to do it because I thought when I went, I wanted to stay for a while. I just had this idea that when I went to Paris, I was going to stay for 6 months or a year. And then in '92, won this grant for my first book, basically. And it was one of these grants. It's called the Lyndhurst Prize. It's one of these things you can't apply for it. You have to be nominated in secret. And an old professor of mine from college nominated me for this thing. I won it, and it was just money. And it was just a big sum of money to do your work. So I thought I'd had this idea since I was a kid about going to Paris and spending some time in Paris and writing, and thought I would do it for a year. Got to Paris in '93 and just completely fell in love with the city. And here we are, 9 years later.
When I sailed to come here for my last trip,
And when was that? When
I
did you
came
make
here in 1968 for good. And the night that I sailed, Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. All the details I remember hearing, the cities were already beginning. They were beginning to burn, and it was unbelievable.
That's stunning.
And here we were sailing away.
You were on the boat.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, I was on the boat.